That's right, guys. Stefanowski's message, give power back to parents. But state Dems aren't convinced. They say his parental Bill of Rights is weaponizing extreme policies under the ruse of keeping students safe. Stefanowski says his plan is common sense.
This is not radical. This is what the majority of parents across Connecticut need. It's what the majority of parents want.
Stefanowski says his parental Bill of Rights aims to empower parents, provide quality education, and keep schools safe. He wants to reform issues from eliminating mask and COVID-19 vaccine mandates to barring transgender female athletes from participating in girls' school sports.
I just don't think it's equitable. I also don't think it's safe.
Hey everyone, how are you? And welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome for the first time. I'm glad to have you on board. It's sort of a bad moment for me to introduce myself because my home state, Connecticut, is in danger. This has not been a good year for the United States. Mouse has been removed from a Tennessee school district in January. The notorious Don't Say Gay bill was signed into state law in Florida in late March. Libraries choosing to keep banned books on their shelves have lost their funding, and Roe v. Wade has been overturned by the Supreme Court last summer. Connecticut schools will soon succumb to this plague if this politician is elected governor this coming November. I was planning to start reading my copy of Colton Hines' new memoir, Miss Memory Lane, earlier in September when I caught a glimpse of that day's edition of the Republican American at Work. The headline states the following in bold serif font. GOP proposes trans ban. Stefanowski campaigns for the parental Bill of Rights. It's a conservative-run newspaper based in Waterbury, so why am I floored they would be on board with that? Maybe it's because I live in an area that's more welcoming, and Connecticut has an amazing track record of providing a safe haven for minorities. Ever since I saw that headline, I've been fuming. I'm worried sick for young LGBTQ+ students and high school athletes that are going to get hurt should this proposal be signed into law. Teachers are also going to be affected by that ban. They're going to be forced to sugarcoat or drop topics from their lesson plans to quell angry parents, leave their beliefs at the door, and hide who they are so they don't risk getting sacked. A few teachers already have for daring to put a pride flag on display in their classrooms. Look at former Oklahoma middle school teacher Tyler Roth. The treatment he received from Jenks Middle School's administration was barbaric. It's going to mean gay students will be refused guidance. By law, teachers won't be allowed to help them to the best of their ability. If they're taught that their feelings are unnatural or their gender identity doesn't make them human, they'll start to act out and/or isolate themselves. The Trevor Project has reported that suicide rates in that demographic are already through the roof. LGBTQ+ youth are 4 times more likely to attempt to take their own lives than their straight peers. 45% of them seriously consider it, including more than half of transgender and non-binary kids, teenagers, and young adults. These statistics were reported in the nonprofit's 2022 National Survey on LGBTQ youth mental health. If parental interference in Connecticut public schools is taken into effect, these rates are likely to rise in that state. Another aspect I need to put out there is that, like it or not, there are going to be school faculty that happen to be in the LGBTQ+ community. They could potentially lose their posts if their sexual orientation and/or gender identity becomes known to a district at large. That's why in this video, I'm going to be reading through this article and talk about why the details in this proposal makes it morally wrong. Republican gubernatorial candidate Bob Stefanowski is proposing to prohibit transgender female athletes from competing on girls' sports teams in public high schools in Connecticut. The proposed prohibition is part of a parental Bill of Rights that Stefanowski and running mate Laura Delvin laid out Tuesday during a news conference outside the state capitol against a backdrop of approving parents in Republican state legislatures.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children? What kind of an example are we setting?
Right away, we have a problem. I mean, why wouldn't we? Because the fact that the Parental Bill of Rights was another name for the Don't Say Gay bill should be self-explanatory enough to anticipate how dangerous that proposal is. Although my understanding of sports suck, I'm going to keep my stance on it to the point. Trans men are men, trans women are women. Let them compete on the sports team that corresponds with their gender identity. Stefanowski's vow to ensure students' safety by separating trans girls from their cisgender peers in sports is ironic because by giving parents and school districts the freedom to out them, he's putting them in harm's way, therefore subjecting them to bullying not just from transphobic students, but from figures of authority that they expect protection from. Since when is the safety of trans students not important? What good is alienating them from sports teams under the guise of protecting their peers? And that's only a portion of our Governor-to-be's to-do list. He has more on his agenda that will result in another increase of COVID-19 cases in Connecticut and cause LGBTQ+ youth to feel unwanted. Democratic Governor Ned Lamont criticized the policy recommendation in remarks to reporters later Tuesday. I think it is a solution looking for a problem. I don't need a lot of politicians piling on and making political hay at the expense of what is probably a very few kids going through a very tough time, he said. Other items on the Republican ticket's education agenda propose a school voucher program open to religious schools, a ban on coronavirus-related school mask and vaccination mandates, and restrictions on the teaching of sensitive sex education issues to younger students, including gender identity and sexual orientation. This is not radical stuff we're talking about here, Stefanowski said. I hate to break it to you, Bob, but yes, it is. Everything about this bill so far, according to this article, is radical. You're excluding a group of people from competing in sports, and for what? How is it not discriminatory? Whatever happened to the caption you passionately tweeted about saying that any act of discrimination is an automatic dismissal? Or is it that the revelation that a star athlete on the girls' basketball team was born male doesn't count because it's disturbing enough to a conservative parent to make them vomit? A side note that I want to talk about real quick before we move on is that the inclusion of lifting mask and vaccination mandates from schools in the proposal is alarming. I know that public places like supermarkets have lifted some of these restrictions recently because more people have been up to date with their vaccinations and booster shots. I've been immunized to the point where I started hugging people again and stopped wearing masks on beaches, which is a relief because I never did, even at funerals honoring a couple of relatives, but the CDC still recommends a well-fitting mask in schools, planes, and in medical institutions like hospitals for a reason. Compared to retails and restaurants, classrooms are enclosed spaces. The coronavirus is easily contagious in these environments. Even if you think your kid will be just fine, they may unknowingly be carriers of the virus. You'll never know what could happen to their classmates with compromised immune systems. They especially have to wear masks and practice social distancing so they themselves don't get sick. Just like trans girls that Stefanowski is advocating high schools to exclude from sports, is their safety also irrelevant? Now that I'm repeating that question, I've started to ask myself another. Has anyone in his campaign team or voting for him comprehended what the ramifications are going to be when they get their way? I know people are going to remind me in the comments that President Biden has declared last week at the time of this recording that the pandemic is over, so I shouldn't be worked up about the Unmask Our Kids campaign. I can't deny daily life has improved significantly since most people are getting vaccinated against the coronavirus and practicing social distancing, but flu season has begun, so it was poor timing for Biden to give that speech. Despite my own relief that things are starting to look up, I'm not dancing around the fact that viruses last longer in frigid temperatures, giving them time to mutate into a deadlier variant. I don't have my hopes up because it's too soon to tell if there's truly no need to wear a mask in public any longer. Luckily, the administration shared my apprehensive feelings about the declaration and informed the media that no changes will be made to the current public health emergency. The Monday before, Dr. Fauci warned that new variants could emerge in the winter. Omicron is classified by the CDC as a variant of concern due to its link to reinfections and its ability to spread, regardless of whether or not people are vaccinated. Yes, breakthrough infections can occur, and I received the misfortune of getting infected last July, but I recovered faster and returned to work after being stuck in quarantine for about a week. I got plenty of rest and drank plenty of fluids, but I'm still alive because I'm vaccinated and I received a booster shot earlier this year. People that fail to or refuse to take these precautions before they get infected as well could die. They won't protect you entirely from Omicron, but its emergence stresses the importance of keeping your shots up to date. In that case, parents that choose not to get their kids vaccinated or ask them to wear a mask are leaving the door open for the virus to infect them and worse, spread it to their classmates. Wearing a mask saves you a lot more trouble than having a ventilator shoved down your throat in the emergency room while you're fighting to stay alive. The Unmask Your Kids campaign is not standing up to your rights as a Connecticut citizen by encouraging your child to ignore CDC guidelines to protect more vulnerable individuals. That's just you being a selfish idiot willing to put strain on doctors that are already caring for hospitalized patients with COVID. 400 people are still dying from the virus every day, and 1 million Americans have died since the pandemic started. It's not a silly scam invented by world leaders to oppress you or deprive you of your rights. Anyone that believes that owes essential workers that have been forced to deal with that baloney to keep helping vulnerable people an apology. For the parents that are chanting, "Our kids, our choice" at their schools, I really would like to see women that have gotten or wanted abortions receive that same kind of support. This isn't a two-way street. The Lamont campaign issued a statement that called the package of policy proposals just another page out of the extremist playbook. Stefanowski had predicted Lamont or his campaign would use such rhetoric. The guy upstairs is going to try to call this extreme or conservative or whatever word he comes up with, Stefanowski said, referring to Lamont in his second-floor office in the Capitol building. People want to hear substance. We're putting substance on the table today. We're putting it out there in writing, and we're going to stand behind it. He doesn't even go around the mulberry bush. It's like he wants to get this proposal signed into law to spite Ned Lamont. Transgender prohibition is one of the more provocative provisions of the Republican ticket's Declaration of Parental Rights because Connecticut has a long tradition of guaranteeing the rights of lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and transgender citizens. Stefanowski and Delvin said athletes who are born male but identify as female have unfair competitive advantages because of physiological differences with cisgender girls. They also raised safety concerns because of what they said were increased risks of physical injury. The bottom line is, whether or not somebody has taken hormone therapy or not, physiologically, there are differences, biological differences, that cannot be changed, Delvin said. Lamont said several times he would leave decisions on athlete eligibility to local school districts and high school athletic leagues. Look, I believe fundamentally in local education. I think that makes sense, he said. I don't think we need state mandates on what athletes can compete in what sports. I leave that up to the local schools. But the Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Association adopted an eligibility rule in 2013 based on its reading of state and federal laws that affirms the right of students to participate in interscholastic sports based on their gender identity. The CIAC concluded that precluding a student from participating on a gender-specific sports team that is consistent with the public gender identity of that student for all other purposes would be unjust and contrary to state and federal laws. Stefanowski and his administration would work with the CIAC to amend the eligibility rule concerning transgender athletes. He raised the possibility of a separate transgender category for athletic competitions. I'd like to find an alternative for them because transgender athletes should have the ability to compete, Stefanowski said. This is not about telling them they can't. We need to try to find a solution, but safety comes first. If the CIAC is not cooperative, he said he would then work with the legislator on the eligibility issue. Does this give off a Jim Crow law vibe to anyone, or is it just me? There's always going to be a risk of injury in sports no matter who's competing and what the conditions are. No athlete can help that they're born with a natural advantage in a certain sport. Excluding them based on their body type alone is still discrimination. An athlete's physiology might give them an unfair advantage over an opponent, but so can rain showers if the latter isn't used to it and assuming lightning isn't on the forecast. Whether a trans girl's physiology differs from a cisgender peer doesn't come into this. I just don't think it's fair. Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't allowed to play with the only Caucasian friend he had in his childhood because of the color of his skin. I remember in grade school, we read out a short play where there was a scene based on that moment. A second boy was added, if I can recall correctly. Maybe it was the other boy's friend. But a line that stuck out to me was, "My dad said he will hit me if I played with you." Corporal punishment was legal back in the 1930s. It was not an empty threat. The point is, try and retell that story where it's about a trans girl that can't play tennis with her cisgender friends because their parents said so, and you'll see that the segregation is still there. That explains why they want to get rid of critical race theory in public schools too. If learning about the subject induces guilt in privileged kids that their ancestors oppressed a group of people that didn't have the same rights they did, you just figured out that's exactly the reason history teachers include it in their lesson plans. It's a major step toward building empathy and acceptance toward classmates that fall into that demographic. I guarantee that neither the association nor the predominantly liberal state legislature is going to willingly cooperate with whatever justification Stefanowski has for his ban. It would make his campaign promise slightly difficult to fulfill, but conservatives have found loopholes in the legal system before. Since the Supreme Court decided it was a fantastic idea to criminalize abortion, and I mean that sarcastically, it could also happen in Connecticut. There is a rumor that gay marriage will not be recognized by federal law once again, and what better way to encourage kids to tolerate this than single out trans kids when it comes to participating in sports and restrict sex education? And we're going to get to that now. Stefanowski and Delvin also proposed a school choice program that would provide vouchers or establish education savings accounts for parents of students in underperforming public schools to help pay to send their children to charter, magnet, technical, and religious schools. It is not about abandoning schools in the city. We need to build those as well, Stefanowski said. We should provide good schools in the cities, but also provide the opportunity to go to magnet schools, charter schools, tech schools, and other things without bankrupting the parents who want to do that now. The GOP candidates also proposed to increase funding for tutoring programs to reverse the learning loss from the COVID-19 pandemic. They noted they oppose COVID-19 mask mandates in schools and requiring COVID-19 vaccinations for students and staffs. It is an individual choice, Stefanowski said. Again, where is that support for women that want to or have gotten abortions? He and Delvin also said parents should decide when and how to discuss sensitive sex education issues with young children, not school districts or state government. We shouldn't be introducing complex topics like sexual orientation or gender identity before the kids have the capacity to understand it. And in some cases, before kids can even tie their own shoes, Stefanowski said. Holy shoot, there's a lot to unpack in that paragraph. That could be any age, and I speak from experience. Since I was a kid and into my adult life, I hated tying my shoes. I see it as unnecessary and completely pointless. My parents insisted I learn anyway, and eventually I did when I was probably in first grade at the latest, but it was a waste of time even trying. Sometimes the knots would come undone if I'm walking and I'd have to retie them every 5, 10, or 15 minutes to around a half hour. As I got older, I wore shoes with laces on them less and less. For a few years, I just wore sneakers for hiking and gym classes until I started solely wearing slip-on shoes since mid-2013. LL Bean's brand of shoes that I commonly wear combines warmth, protection from strain, and comfort. It's not the point I'm making because it's a personal preference. But even before other kids learned how to tie their shoes, they will inevitably be exposed to displays of affection that can range from seeing a Disney princess share a passionate kiss with her Prince Charming to their fathers casually smooching their mother's cheeks and vice versa. Like many subjects taught in schools, I believe sex education should be a gradual process. I'm not saying parents should explain to their elementary-aged kids like toddlers in graphic detail where babies come from if they ask. I also don't think they should be allowed to watch adult movies unsupervised. That'd be like throwing them in the deep end of a pool before they're ready to swim. What they should learn at an early age is that couples kiss because they love each other. An article that was published on a website for an Indian-based newspaper, the Deccan Herald, reported that by watching their parents be affectionate in front of them, kids learn that love is a part of nature. They are free to share it with another person, and it's a part of themselves that they shouldn't be ashamed or afraid of. That way, when they see two men holding hands and two women holding hands, they wouldn't be bothered by it because then their parents would use it as an opportunity to give them the same explanation. Then, when they're older, they can trust their parents to know that they like men, they like women, or both with the confidence that they're still loved no matter what. It is a major first step toward teaching them about showing compassion toward their LGBTQ plus peers. According to psychotherapist Kala Bala Subramanian, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, children learn more effectively from observing behavior than written and oral instruction trying to explain it. The article makes a notable mention about consent near the end, and this is really important for what I want to talk about based on my experience when I first watched the Netflix adaptation of A Series of Unfortunate Events. Children whose parents are affectionate in front of them should also be taught to be respectful to other people's boundaries. If their grandparents, cousins, or friends are not in the mood for a hug, They should learn it's not because they don't like them, it's just that some days they want affection and some days they don't. Likewise, parents must teach their children that they too have the power to say no to things they are uncomfortable with doing. If they aren't taught that lesson, or because it's a sensitive topic, or if they're forced to go along with everything they're told to do, they could end up abducted, going missing, and or killed. My mother and I were watching The Bad Beginning Part 2 on a flat-screen TV in our living room when the show was still new. My father walked in during a part where Count Olaf lets it slip that he casted Violet Baudelaire as his bride-to-be in a performance held at a community theater. The implications were clear. Count Olaf made remarks that implied he found her attractive. He called her pretty, touched her shoulders, and even attempted to kiss her on screen. Yuck! Even if it was just a play, Violet was obviously uncomfortable portraying her legal guardian's love interest based on her terrified tone, and looking for excuses to get out of participating. Count Olaf was aware that Violet is mortified, but he mocked her feelings and forced her to agree to marry him anyway, lest he would drop her infant sister off his tower while she's locked in a birdcage. My father was appalled by that part and wondered why it would be included on a kids' show, to which my mother answered that Count Olaf's plot to marry his adoptive daughter was an attempt to get the Baudelaire fortune. He wasn't convinced, though, incidentally, a couple decades earlier, a school district in Georgia attempted to ban The Bad Beginning from its libraries for its inclusion in the plot. Was it disturbing for a book or Netflix show geared for children? Absolutely! That's the idea. Should it be removed from shelves in public schools and libraries? No, because his plan to marry Violet for her family's money reveals that's exactly the kind of monster Count Olaf is. By reading a series of unfortunate events, contrary to warnings from Lemony Snicket in each prologue to put the books down, young readers would know that there are vulgar, malefic people just like Count Olaf that exist in strangers that approach them on a playground to follow them to their truck where they claim to be giving out candy. They can also be private tutors that overstep boundaries with the kids they're working with, store managers that abuse their authority to blackmail an employee into having sex with them, or even in families where 34% of SA incidents reported to the police occur. Abuse is far more likely to be perpetrated by someone the victim knows. David Handler wasn't glamorizing Count Olaf's infatuation with Violet. He wasn't incorporating any element of the situation in The Bad Beginning that made it sound romantic. No, the safety of Violet's young siblings was held hostage, so she had no choice but to go along with Olaf's plan and let him take control of her estate. Handler addressed the backlash in an interview with Fresh Air host Terry Gross in 2001. Audio of that interview was obtained by NPR and published on its website on the same day the Netflix show came out. When Terry asked Handler about the book ban in that district, his answer was, in his own words, "I'm at a loss for how to construct a villain who isn't doing villainous things. If Count Olaf were only doing things that no one would object to, then he really wouldn't be much of a villain. So I'm somewhat nonplussed by that kind of criticism that, boy, Count Olaf is sure a terrible person, and so I always have to write back and say, well, yes he is." This compels me to question why Disney's animated adaptation of Aladdin is deemed age-appropriate when Jafar planned to marry Jasmine with the intent to get rid of her and rule over Agrabah unopposed. Iago came up with the idea after all, and Jafar did say he loved the way his foul little mind worked. Jasmine's age has often been up for discussion because it's never been made clear in the movie, but most fans and journalists agree that she was 15 going on 16. She's not much older than Violet, but a series of unfortunate events, and Aladdin reflects the idea that an older man attempted to wed a teenage girl in order to gain power over her as a person. A teacher that was a substitute in my high school vocational education and some science classes told a story about a similar incident that happened to someone that arranged to meet with another person on Craigslist in an isolated place. Maybe it was a deserted alley. I don't recall the location in detail, but I do remember that this person went alone. They were expecting to buy a product from a vendor, but they realized too late that they were tricked and ended up dead. It scared me at the time, but it's a reason why, before I talk to a new person online, I always make sure to look at their profiles to see if they're trustworthy enough to befriend or do business with. The moral was, if something offered to you online looks too good to be true, chances are, it is. If you agree with Stefanowski and still think that sex education shouldn't be a part of the curriculum in public Connecticut schools, let's take it a step further and talk about how that applies to kids that may secretly harbor feelings for their same-sex friends or peers. I plan to review Miss Memory Lane by Teen Wolf actor Colton Hines as a long-term project. I heard fantastic testimonials about the memoir, and Hines posted a video on Instagram where he got emotional after writing about his late mother. During a virtual meet and greet at GalaxyCon Live where I got to meet him, he read the dedication to me. The way it touched me caused me to have high expectations that the memoir is going to deliver a raw, enriching story. So this passage can be found in his memoir on page 19. In order for this to make sense, keep in mind that Colton Hines was 6 years old at the time he was friends with this boy he had feelings with. The first boy I remember falling in love with was named Bryce, a boy in the same grade as me. He was small and tow-headed and always laughing. His laughter, did something to me. When I saw people experience emotion so purely, like genuine, unadulterated joy, I was overcome with envy. If I was bouncing a basketball or playing in the yard, I'd stop just to watch someone laugh. Why can't that be me? I wondered. I wasn't happy unless I was alone, lost in the world I was creating for myself. When I was playing with a ball, or throwing rocks at oncoming traffic, or doing anything alone, I was at peace. Nobody was telling me how to do things or to act a certain way. In his closet after school, Bryce and I played our favorite game, show and tell. Okay, he said, I'll do that as long as you don't pee in my mouth. I liked the shame that came afterward. It felt like a natural way to keep me from craving the feeling again too soon. Depression and romantic attraction aren't emotions that little kids can just be shielded from. For straight kids, they'll think the sight of a same-sex couple holding hands is ghastly, but for their LGBT plus peers, they'll be anguished that they can't embrace their feelings because their parents don't want to talk about it with them. If they don't teach their children to be comfortable in their own skin, it's what sex education in high schools are there for. Restrictions on the subject could mean that boys won't be able to recognize if a girl doesn't want to make conversation with them, and girls won't be able to find resources and or medication that can help them prevent unwanted teenage pregnancies. They won't know how to practice safe sex into their college years and when they're married. For religious reasons, some people won't engage in premarital sex, but it won't save them from contracting sexually transmitted diseases that are scarier to live with than getting the education to take these precautions. School districts and parents should take notes from France, too. When I enrolled in French cinema during my last semester in university, my professor gave a lecture on film ratings before watching the first 30 minutes or so of Amélie. I remember she said that the film was rated G because the French believe it's never too early to teach kids that sex is a natural part of life. Reviews posted on Common Sense by parents that let their kids as young as 11 years old watch the film with them stated that it was charming, hilarious, and beautiful. While there were a couple scenes containing nudity and one that took place in an erotic store, most weren't deterred and instead recognized the U.S. and France have different customs on sex as a topic. One family gave a talk to their daughter before they watched Amélie together to get an idea of what it might be like. The sexual content the little girl's parents warned her about didn't bother her because she didn't notice what the store was selling. Amélie is truly a work of art. I could not recommend it more for people that enjoy classical music, a good-natured titular character that finds joy in the little things in life, and avant-garde stories about finding true love. It's like a Disney movie made for adults. Put restrictions on sex education to cater to a bunch of disgruntled parents, and their children will grow up to hate their LGBTQ plus peers, hate themselves, cannot recognize that no means no, contract an STD, and become extremely vulnerable in situations that could lead to rape.
Now look, it's true. You shouldn't have sex until you're ready. You should wait until you're in love. But I mean, hey, we're all human, huh? We have urges, and they are perfectly natural. And if you do make the choice to act on them, make sure you protect yourselves. Use a condom.
State law already allows parents and guardians to exempt their children from instruction pertaining to HIV/AIDS and family life education programs. Stefanowski and Devlin also proposed requiring social media platforms to delete the accounts of children up to age 16 upon the request of a parent or guardian. Federal law currently requires parental consent for websites to collect personal information about children under age 13. You see plenty of kids looking into their iPhones and God knows what they're looking at. If you're under 16 years old, your parents should know, Stefanowski said. In addition to tutoring programs, the GOP ticket also is proposing to use budget reserves to pay for more school security upgrades. And that's the end of the article the Republican American published, though I still have some thoughts on that last part. The social media portion of Stefanowski's proposal has its own pros and cons, but mostly cons. I'll tell you why in a minute, but first, I'm going to talk about why it's generally wise for parents to keep an eye on their kids when they're on social media. I didn't use Facebook until I was 15. At the time, I didn't care for it because all I thought about was playing video games, making my own, and looking forward to reading the next graphic novel I'd find in my high school's library. It's where I came across 3 biographical books the Anne Frank House authorized for publication, and years later, I found them on Barnes & Noble's website. It's another outlet that students and teachers looking to resist conservative interference might want to look into if they can't find a banned book or movie at their schools. Ignoring the fact that users under 13 are not allowed on social media anyway, what would a 10 or 11-year-old child be doing there anyway? They got Roblox, Pop Tropica, Fortnite, and Minecraft to occupy themselves, play with their friends after school, and just be kids. Jackson Robert Scott, a child actor that portrayed Georgie from the It remakes, has his mother manage his Instagram account. What this means is that she might post a caption on his behalf and protect him from unwanted attention. I checked it out myself, and I noticed that a lot of the comments on these posts were respectful, which is good. Some of them praised his growth as an actor on a popular Netflix series where he plays the youngest son of a father that was murdered by one of his students. I've only found one comment that was gross in a post about a Thanksgiving gathering and had to report it. For the most part, Jackson's mother has done a great job looking out for her son. Though, to be on the safe side, I think she should turn off comments on his account because that comment didn't get taken down and Instagram was primarily unresponsive. I think submitting a request to Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, Reddit, etc. to have your child's account deleted has its own problems, primarily because it's too drastic of a measure. A better alternative for parents would be to supervise their children while they're logged in. That supervision could become a moment to teach them about internet safety via observation. Privating their accounts so that only relatives and friends they know from school can follow them will relieve parents of the additional concern that adults, mainly MAPs, posing as another child, will start talking to them or bullying them. The only aspect of this portion of this proposal I agree with is that parents should know what websites their kids are on so they don't come across content that could frighten them or they know who they're talking to. However, I support that teenagers have the right to their privacy. If parents pry too much into what their kids are up to online, they'll end up pushing them away. They'll feel intruded on and they aren't going to learn how to deal with problems on their own. Sometimes a teenager would seek out their parents' guidance when they need a second opinion, like how can their experience with failed relationships help them, but whether they decide to take it or not, or ask, is entirely up to them. If you're still unhappy with your child consuming social media and you can't trust that they'll be safe online, I would still talk to them about it and punish them if they aren't going to willingly log off. There's no need to waste the platform's time guiding your child to use them responsibly. One other reason I disagree with the social media portion of this proposal is that to an abused child, internet access is a shelter to them. A close friend I hold dear has a father that beats him and an emotionally distant mother at home. They're both homophobic, and their disapproval of his sexual orientation hurts him to the point where he'd tell me he'd cry. His boarding school and his roommate's home, where he'd go to in the summers, are the only places where he feels safe. I urged him to tell his dorm parent when he was struggling to decide if he should. He's terrified of what could happen at home if he did, but I reassured him the school will protect him if it escalates and I'll still be there for him if he still feels alone. So he pondered on it and decided to report the abuse. I don't know if anything came of it, but getting the school involved hopefully had some effect. If his Reddit account got shut down at the request of either one of his parents, he'll have nowhere to go, nor anyone to get support from. The proposal will inadvertently become another tactic for abusive parents to control their children, and I can't tolerate it. I just think it's oppressive. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think down below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss my review of Miss Memory Lane when it's finished. I'll end this video by urging my Connecticut friends, family, and viewers to go out and vote on Election Day. Register if you haven't already. The lives of Connecticut LGBTQ+ youth and your child's future are in your hands. Don't let this vile proposal come to pass. Godspeed.